In today's video, let's look at why rejection is so difficult for victims of emotional incest to tolerate. So growing up in a way where you're there for your parent, it's all about their needs, means that you're denying your needs and you're basing how well you do in life, how things are going, on how well you're pleasing. So it kind of gets overlooked a bit because we may not even know we're living in a constant state of avoiding rejection. It's so natural and normal for victims of emotional incest that it's kind of the way things are. It's how they live. It's like the air they breathe. And kids who are emotionally smothered live for that because that's how you get all your praise. That's how you begin to find your self-worth, so you think. You think it's based on something external, based on your parent. But of course, you get older and you realize it's based on how you feel about yourself, not on anybody else, especially not your parent. So childhood is one thing, but as we get older, you may find that you're very hypersensitive to any kind of rejection. This is simply a clue and insight into how you always had to walk on eggshells at home. And now you struggle with relationships in different ways because you're so very sensitive and you hate rejection. Because you were judged heavily growing up, when you're in this role, you can't be yourself. So there's a judgment with that. So any kind of judgment as an adult may feel like a rejection. You're just judging me. I can tell they don't like me. And then maybe you're even setting up rejection for yourself because you're deciding in advance, my friends are not really going to like me. This new boyfriend or girlfriend is surely going to reject me. So you're handling rejection in this unconscious way, in a way. But now by facing it, dealing with it, talking about it, perhaps finding a therapist who can work with you on this, that's how we begin to diminish these symptoms. Another possible coping mechanism is to be very alone in your life, very self-sufficient in a way. Maybe you find a career where you can just work by yourself. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in terms of following your passion, a job you like, whether it's around people or not around people, but just know the motivation for it. Know why you're wanting to work alone. Is it because if you work with others, you may be more susceptible to being rejected? They don't like your ideas. They don't like your presentation. Maybe they're critiquing your work a lot at the job place. So the black and white coping mechanism comes in perhaps in terms of screw it, I'm out of here, I'm just going to work by myself. And that can be okay. Maybe you'll find a job that you really like by yourself, but just know why it's happening. We have to understand ourselves on this level or it's going to always control us. Notice it as a way to handle rejection, and perhaps a very broad way, you have a very indifferent, I don't care attitude about most everything. Don't blame yourself for this if that's what's going on in you. Don't beat yourself up over this. It's simply a reaction to how you were raised. That's one of the symptoms of being a victim of childhood trauma. And so, as a coping mechanism, when we get older, perhaps we just act indifferent to everything. Like, I don't care what you do. Or we can flip it around and perhaps it's something you really love and you want to get closer to a person or a thing or a job or a situation, but you're shutting it down and acting like you don't really want it when you do because it simply feels safer. It's how you're handling a possible rejection. So one way you may notice this is that you tend to overreact. Black and white thinking, well, you had to have black and white thinking as a coping mechanism to grow up. Things had to be rigid just to survive your childhood. And that goes pretty much for any child who's a victim of some sort of childhood trauma. But the thing to be careful with is that when we overreact and we really think we've done something wrong, I'm just a horrible person, I'm worthless, then it may create a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, right? It's a cycle. So we have to really catch ourselves with our overreactions. Ask ourselves if this feels reasonable. Why am I wanting to just cut this person out of my life based on a minor argument we just had? So you weren't taught to resolve conflict, for example, because you were always in your role growing up. Well, now as an adult, there's going to be conflict sometimes. So notice how you react or overreact. And notice where it pops up. For example, does it happen more at work, but you're okay in relationships in general? Or maybe you're really triggered in relationships in this way, but at work, no big deal. So where does it pop up for you? This is like you being a sleuth, figuring it out, putting the pieces together, and then tracing it back to your childhood where it all originated. Along with the overreacting, perhaps you're reacting in intense anger to situations that may be mildly annoying for sure, but what's that anger about? Probably you can trace it back to your childhood being emotionally taken over by a parent or your parents. And you're very pissed off about it and you need to deal with that rage inside of you. And if not, it'll show in this way, perhaps at the workplace or with others, with friends, and you fly off the handle. You may be responding this way because some sort of rejection is challenging you on your level of self-worth. Just the fact you're allowed to breathe air, perhaps, be on this planet, because you really weren't treated that way growing up, right? Your identity was stripped away. It was wiped out. There really wasn't supposed to be a you there. So when we grow up like this, the anger is a way to protect ourselves, especially when we're feeling rejected. In a way, it's sort of a projection. We're focusing on what makes us so mad. We're so mad at this person, for example, instead of looking inward at what is really triggering us. Maybe it doesn't have anything to do with that person at all. It may, but you have to figure that out. That's part of being a sleuth. So being in this world, living our everyday life, being rejected is going to happen here and there. It's a natural part of life. It may not be rejection at all. It's simply a sharing of differing opinions, different points of view. But again, because this wasn't permitted in your household growing up, it was all about your mother or all about your father, let's say, then that doesn't allow for this middle ground that I was just describing there, right? There's no middle ground. And so you weren't helped with a middle ground growing up, but now you can find this out for yourself as an adult. You can work on the middle ground. As you do more work on this topic, perhaps with a therapist, hopefully at some point, you'll be able to see that your sense of self-worth will come more and more from you. What you're all about has much less to do with what's going on, who's around you. But how could you know that if you're raised always having to be focused on a parent's needs? You wouldn't know that, right? And once we set the bar for ourselves, so to speak, versus letting other people set the bar for us based on what they think of us, what they want, the more we go to where we want to set the bar, the less issue we'll have with any type of so-called rejection. And even if something is a flat out rejection, we begin to let the person have their say or their way because they're entitled to whatever opinion they have, and it won't affect how we feel about ourselves one little bit, or at least a lot less than it used to. So I named just a few symptoms here today. There's many more. Perhaps you can add some in the comment section below. I'd love to read what you have in mind, what you've experienced in your life. So please do leave some comments, and please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.